This is a devotion for Holy Week, a poem called The Sacrifice by George Herbert. O all ye who pass by, whose eyes and mind to worldly things are sharp, but to me blind, to me who took eyes that I might you find, was ever grief like mine? The princes of my people make a head against their Maker. They do wish me dead, who cannot wish, except I give them bread. Was ever grief like mine? Without me each one who doth now me brave had to this day been an Egyptian slave. They used that power against me which I gave. Was ever grief like mine? Mine own apostle, who the bag did bear, though he had all I had, did not forbear to sell me also, and to put me there. Was ever grief like mine? For 30 pence he did my death devise, who at 300 did the ointment prize, not half so sweet as my sweet sacrifice. Was ever grief like mine? Therefore my soul melts, and my heart's dear treasure drops blood, the only beads my words to measure. O let this cup pass, if it be thy pleasure. Was ever grief like mine? These drops, being tempered with sinners' tears, a balsam are for both the hemispheres, curing all wounds but mine, all but my fears. Was ever grief like mine? Yet my disciples sleep. I cannot gain 1 hour of watching, but their drowsy brain comforts not me, and doth my doctrine stain. Was ever grief like mine? Arise, arise, they come. Look how they run. Alas, what haste they make to be undone. How with their lanterns do they seek the sun? Was ever grief like mine? With clubs and staves they seek me as a thief, who am the way and truth, the true relief, most true of those who are my greatest grief. Was ever grief like mine? Judas, dost thou betray me with a kiss? Canst thou find hell about my lips, and miss of life just at the gates of life and bliss? Was ever grief like mine? See, they lay hold on me, not with hands of faith, but fury. Yet at their commands I suffer binding, who have loosed their bands. Was ever grief like mine? All my disciples flee. Fear puts a bar betwixt my friends and me. They leave the star that brought the wise men of the east from far. Was ever grief like mine? Then from one ruler to another bound they lead me, urging that it was not sound what I taught. Comments would the test confound. Was ever grief like mine? The priest and rulers all false witness seek 'gainst him, who seeks not life, but is the meek and ready paschal lamb of this great week. Was ever grief like mine? Then they accuse me of great blasphemy, that I did thrust into the deity, who thought that any robbery was ever grief like mine. Some said that I the temple to the floor in 3 days raised, and raised as before. Why, he that built the world can do much more. Was ever grief like mine? Then they condemn me all with that same breath, which I do give them daily unto death. Thus Adam, my first breathing, rendereth. Was ever grief like mine? They bind and lead me unto Herod. He sends me to Pilate. This makes them agree. But yet their friendship is my enmity. Was ever grief like mine? Herod and all his bands do set me light, who teach all hands to war, fingers to fight, and only am the Lord of hosts and might. Was ever grief like mine? Herod in judgment sits, while I do stand, examines me with a censorious hand. I him obey, who all things else command. Was ever grief like mine? The Jews accuse me with despitefulness, and vying malice with my gentleness, pick quarrels with their only happiness. Was ever grief like mine? I answer nothing, but with patience prove if stony hearts will melt with gentle love. But who does hawk at eagles with a dove? Was ever grief like mine? My silence rather doth augment their cry. My dove doth back into my bosom fly, because the raging waters still are high. Was ever grief like mine? Hark how they cry aloud still, crucify. It is not fit he live a day, they cry, who cannot live less than eternally. Was ever grief like mine? Pilate a stranger holdeth off, but they, mine own dear people, cry, away, away, with noises confused, fighting the day. Was ever grief like mine? Yet still they shout and cry and stop their ears, putting my life among their sins and fears, and therefore wish my blood on them and theirs. Was ever grief like mine? See how spite cankers things. These words aright, used and wished, are the whole world's light. But honey is their gall, brightness their night. Was ever grief like mine? They choose a murderer, and all agree in him to do themselves a courtesy, for it was their own case who killed me. Was ever grief like mine? And a seditious murderer he was, but I, the Prince of Peace, peace that doth pass all understanding, more than heaven doth glass. Was ever grief like mine? Why, Caesar is their only king, not I. He clave the stone rock when they were dry, but surely not their hearts, as I well try. Was ever grief like mine?
Ah, how they scourge me, yet my tenderness doubles each lash, and yet their bitterness winds up my grief to a mysteriousness. Was ever grief like mine? They buffet him and box him as they list, who grasps the earth and heaven with his fist, and never yet, whom he would punish, missed. Was ever grief like mine? Behold, they spit me in scornful wise, who by my spittle gave the blind man eyes, leaving his blindness to my enemies. Was ever grief like mine? My face they cover, though it be divine. As Moses' face was veiled, so is mine, lest on their double dark souls either shine. Was ever grief like mine? Servants and abjects flout me, they are witty. Now prophesy, who strikes thee, is their ditty. So they in me deny themselves all pity. Was ever grief like mine? And now I am delivered unto death, which each one calls for so with utmost breath, that he before me well nigh suffereth. Was ever grief like mine? Weep not, dear friends, since I for both have wept, when all my tears were blood, the while you slept. Your tears for your own fortunes should be kept. Was ever grief like mine? The soldiers lead me to the common hall, where they deride me, they abuse me all. Yet for 12 heavenly legions I could call. Was ever grief like mine? Then with a scarlet robe they me array, which shows my blood to be the only way, and cordial left to repair man's decay. Was ever grief like mine? Then on my head a crown of thorns I wear, for these are all the grapes Sion doth bear, though I my vine planted and watered there. Was ever grief like mine? So sits the earth's great curse in Adam's fall upon my head, so I remove it all from the earth unto my brows, and bear the thrall. Was ever grief like mine? Then with the reed they gave to me before, they strike my head, the rock, from thence all store of heavenly blessings issue evermore. Was ever grief like mine? They bow their knees to me and cry, Hail King! Whatever scoffs and scornfulness can bring. I am the floor, the sink, where they it fling. Was ever grief like mine? Yet since man's sceptres are as frail as reeds, and thorny all their crowns, bloodied their weeds, I, who am truth, turn into truth their deeds. Was ever grief like mine? The soldiers also spit upon that face, which angels did desire to have the grace, and prophets once to see, but found no place. Was ever grief like mine? Thus trimmed, forth they bring me to the root, who crucify him, cry with one strong shout, God holds his peace at man, and man cries out. Was ever grief like mine? They lead me in once more, and putting then mine own clothes on, they lead me out again. Whom devils flee, thus is he tossed of men. Was ever grief like mine? And now, weary of sport, glad to engross all spite in one, counting my life their loss, they carry me to my utmost bitter cross. Was ever grief like mine? O all ye who pass by, behold and see! Man stole the fruit, but I must climb the tree of life to all, but only me. Was ever grief like mine? Lo, here I hang, charged with a world of sin, the greater world of the two, for that came in by words, for this by sorrow I must win. Was ever grief like mine? Such sorrow as, if sinful man could feel, or feel his part, he would not cease to kneel, till all were melted, though he were all steel. Was ever grief like mine? But, O my God, why leavest thou me, the Son in whom thou dost delight to be? My God, never was grief like mine. Shame tears my soul, my body many a wound. Sharp nails pierce this, but sharper that confound reproaches which are free while I am bound. Was ever grief like mine? Now heal thyself, physician, now come down. Alas, I did so when I left my crown and father's smile for you to feel his frown. Was ever grief like mine? In healing not myself, there doth consist all that salvation, which ye now resist, your safety in my sickness doth subsist. Was ever grief like mine? Betwixt two thieves I spend my utmost breath, as he that for some robbery suffereth. Alas, what have I stolen from you? Death. Was ever grief like mine? A king my title is, prefixed on high, yet by my subjects am condemned to die, a servile death in servile company. Was ever grief like mine? They give me vinegar mingled with gall, but more with malice. Yet when they did call, with manna, angels' food, I fed them all. Was ever grief like mine? They part my garments, and by lot dispose my coat, the type of love which once cured those who sought for help, never malicious foes. Was ever grief like mine? Nay, after death their spite shall further go, for they will pierce my side. I full well know that as sin came, so sacraments might flow. Was ever grief like mine? But now I die, now all is finished, my woe, man's weal, and now I bow my head. Only let others say, when I am dead, never was grief like mine.